Today, I would like to mm, bring a critique of Andy Edwards' by now quite famous definition of the value of music, which is based on virtuosism and also, I would say, harmonic complexity. Two characteristics that are important for enjoyment and for value, but are far from a good theory of music. Why do modern jazz musicians all sound the same? Well, it's an economic and cultural phenomena. Cultural first. I believe that jazz has its peak in the 60s to mid 70s, or until Miles died in 91. Or because I'm such a fan of fusion, I would say between the 50s and the 90s. Others may be more linked to acoustic jazz and say that jazz pinnacle was the 50s and the early 60s, and that's valid too. The point is that jazz doesn't necessarily have to continue forever. Like other forms of music, like classical European, it's quite clear in that case that it's a music that has run its course. And that could happen to jazz as well. And that's the way music's evolve. And there is nothing wrong with it. Well, it's sad for those that grew up waiting for the next record of our favorite jazz musicians and see how they were evolving and changing this style of music. In my case, it was Miles Davis. I was waiting in front of the record store to see if when they opened, they had already received Live Evil or any record of the 60s, and I'm thinking of the 70s. So that situation that maybe Marsalis saw in advance prompted the jazz becoming the classical music of the United States. It's Black American music, but the upper middle class of the United States helped, and the black upper middle class helped making it their model of classical music. What does imply? Well, that it's not a music that's live anymore. It's not learned or played in the streets or bars. It's taught and played in universities, in concert halls, in colleges. And there are standards set by those who have the power over curricula and aesthetic, and in good measure also the owners of the companies that were selling this music, that are modeled after the European aesthetic of complexity and virtuosism. And that is where it ends. And because now to be called a jazz musician, one needs a degree from one of the universities that has adopted those aesthetic criteria. Well, they have a lot in common in the way they sound, and it's very difficult for them to have a voice. On top that the music itself has become very difficult to innovate. Think of the painting, for example. In my opinion, it ran its course. It would be very impressive if we waited for the next Picasso or Rembrandt or Velázquez, but they already exhausted what you can do with a canvas. Paul Klee showed to us that state of affairs when he presented a white canvas. I mean, basically everything has been done. What you can do is repeat the past with themes from the present, which has a certain appeal. And maybe jazz can do the same. We'll see. But the fact that has become a classical music to be put in a pedestal rather than change, and to be called a jazz musician, one needs to have huge standards of virtuosism and knowledge of harmony, makes it very difficult to innovate, since the persons who play the music the best and are getting the opportunities to record are those that have these common attributes that paradoxically make them sound quite similar. So the element of cultural evolution in jazz and the economic are powerful. Also, technology can benefit from jazz as a classical music if a full catalog can be reproduced again with a new technology. And the appeal of the first recordings of Louis Armstrong will be once again shown to the public that never heard it with such high quality, for example. That's what happened with the CD at one point. So that model seems to be, since the beginning of the 80s, quite successful and now dominates the art form, in my opinion. Even if there was evolution since the 90s, in my opinion. Then there is also other dimensions of music that are forgotten by Andy, and that are important to consider and give music a lot more than virtuosism and complexity. So here the situation that we face is music is universal according to science, ethnography, studies by anthropologists and physiologists even. For example, there was a famous study of 135 cultures and found that there was music in all of them, dealing with complex themes like love, mourning, or dance. So here we have emotional expression and rhythm are essential for music. And jazz had that in droves. Uh, the categories that we find of music that constitute domains of value are for types of songs. We've been talking of rhythm as one of each dimension of value. Now we focus on the vocal aspect and the types of songs. We have lullabies, for example, who are slow, repetitive, including rhythm, repetitive, that's soothing and calms infants. It has a low rhythmic complexity, and the melodies are gentle. We have that in jazz too. For example, Jean-Pierre by Miles Davis, although it wouldn't have a calming effect on children. There are also dance songs, elementary, part of the success of jazz. And geniuses like Ellington were making people dance at the same time that they were producing rhythmic music that was full of virtuosism, like Johnny Hodges, and harmonically complex, like Lush Life, with Ellington's alter ego. Then we have healing songs. That is also is not fast, but it's also repetitive in its rhythm and used in rituals, like trance-inducing rhythms. We find that in gospel and in the jazz gospel. Think about soul jazz, for example. Ray Charles or Listen Here. Then we have love songs that are emotionally expressive, a common element in blues. Blues have the most expressive form of jazz, in my opinion, and has love songs also have changes of pitch and dynamics, another element of blues, the dynamics. So you can see that in these categories of music, mostly vocal, we find a lot of virtues by means of which value jazz, and that was forgotten by Andy as much as he forgot rhythm, the most basic. After the rhythm and the vocal aspect, we have something that we could call the universals of rhythm and melody. The tonality, having a tonal center, this is universal, and a rhythmic regularity. That's something that the humans like. Jazz has a huge contribution to rhythmic variety and to playing with the tonal center, moving it around, coming back to it, and that produces a lot of satisfaction in the listener. Of course, these rhythmic regularities produce group coordination. It's a form of social cohesion. And if one looks at the jazz dancing, is very easy to imagine the cohesion and the collective happiness that dancing to jazz produce. And the collective expression of emotion, like in gospel, in certain forms of jazz that adopted that type of rhythm and singing pattern. Then we have, after the tonality and the rhythmic regularity, we could talk about the repetition of the motifs, something that also is very appealing. Jazz does it with ballads and blues. And this joy of repetition is very present in funk, for example, funk jazz, and other subgenres across its history. That's valuable too. Then there is the issue of descending melodic contours, like as many lullabies and love songs feature a downward pitch movement, which may align with innate vocalization that have, for example, soothing speech. The way jazz is delivered sometimes, like Billie Holiday, this way of telling a story has some element of that descending melodic contour. Then we have another dimension, to me essential, the shared emotional and bodily responses, the arousal aspect. The listeners globally perceive the music through dimensions of positive, negative emotions and arousal, calm or energetic. Even when the cultural mood terms differ, but for jazz, this is expressed by the blues more than another type of jazz structure. There is a huge arousal and dynamics from calm to energetic, and the balance is positive and negative. There is joy and there is suffering, and there is an expression that's true through it, not phony, and that can be perceived by many persons who are exposed to it. This has a lot of value, and also the bodily sensations it evokes, right? The sad or tender music is felt in the chest and the head, and the danceable music activates our limbs, and these sensations correlate with the vagal or the autonomic responses of our body, like heart rate changes, and that's quite universal. We cannot claim that jazz doesn't evoke these feelings and these sensations uh, conditioned but real through jazz in the autonomous nervous system as much as in our emotions, cognitively speaking, right, in the brain. So these bodily sensations and emotions are essential. The emotional recognition, the basic emotions of happiness and sadness are part of jazz and part of music in general, and are brought by acoustic cues like the tempo or the harmony that induce one or other feeling. The richness of jazz can bring these emotional elements to a maximum expression. At the end of the day, it's a music that intends to uh, bring you an emotion, make you feel. It's not to be analyzed and thought about. It's about feeling, moving, and dancing. Basic human responses to sound. And after the emotional and bodily responses dimension, if you want the psychophysiological dimension, we can move into cultural transmission of jazz, which happens between generations. Um, these patterns evolved in jazz and other musics in discrete pitches, motivic repetition that are transmitted across generations, suggesting that the cognitive biases of a given culture shape the musical structure of that culture. And that's very important fundamentally for Black Americans. That's why it's very damaging to persist in the idea that this is as white as black music, and that even if it was created in a city where there were many cultures, that fundamentally the growth and the history of jazz is built by the African American or Black American community. It's dangerous to negate that because it's part of the cultural transmission of cultural identity. And also, there is a cultural transmission of syncopation preferences, as you can see in the Latin American music, the Afro-Caribbean. So rhythmic complexity or syncopation is favored in jazz because such patterns are common in culture, even coming from Africa, as Miles Davis noted once. And it's important not to be enculturated because then one's culture may lose these characteristic rhythmic patterns. It's us, the Europeans, that we learn and adapt to these type of cognitive biases towards certain types of syncopation, for example. So, what there is this two elements that are not opposed: the universality of what appeals in music and the specificity of what different cultures create, and that it keeps changing with time because cultures mix, they create new artistic expressions, for example, Latin jazz. So terms like love even can be interpreted differently in different cultures. So this and that despite that both evoke an arousal response. So this is another important anthropological value of music, that preserves it through time in the community. So here you have, I more or less presented you with a theory that has at least 7 or 8 dimensions in addition to the two presented by Andy. Which one is richer? Which one is more universal and at the same time values more the specificity of what jazz brought to the world? Of course, mine. Of course, it's not simple. It's not difficult. And is just biased towards the European aesthetic, considering virtuosism and harmony the only values that should be applied to consider jazz value. Well, after all, I'm the professor. Well, that's a joke. Well, maybe not. Thank you so much for listening.